Welcome to Margin Notes, the podcast where we explore the hidden rules behind a messy, complex world. Today, we're starting with a fish, the European eel, but we're really diving into why the world so often defies our intuition. We'll unpack why simple math breaks in complex systems, how small changes lead to massive consequences, what eels, epidemics, and economic bubbles have in common, and how to think clearly when everything feels chaotic. From exponential growth to emergent behavior, survivorship bias to the illusion of knowing, this episode is your mental survival kit for navigating the strange, non-linear world we actually live in. Let's get into it.
Okay, let's dive in. Think about this fish. It looks like a snake, right?
Huh?
Lives for like decades in rivers here in Europe. Seems simple enough.
Yeah, but it's anything but simple.
Yeah.
This fish, the European eel, its life cycle is just baffling. It travels thousands of miles.
Thousands. Across the Atlantic to this one very specific place, the Sargasso Sea.
And get this, it only goes there to be born. That's where they spawn. But it gets weirder, you know?
Oh, yeah.
They go through these, total transformations.
Metamorphoses?
It's something out of a sci-fi movie, changing form completely.
Exactly. And then the craziest part, these tiny little larvae, they call them glass eels because they're see-through.
Yeah.
They somehow navigate all the way back, thousands of miles again, across the ocean to the exact rivers their parents were from. And they've never been there.
How do they even know the way? It's nuts.
It was a total mystery for ages. Fishermen couldn't find the babies out at sea, couldn't even tell males from females back in the rivers. The whole thing, the biology, the navigation, it's incredibly complex, nonlinear, totally counterintuitive. And that, right there, that's our hook for today. The eel is like a perfect symbol for the world we live in. Whether it's nature or society or just all the data washing over us, things are usually way more complicated and unpredictable and frankly weirder than our gut feelings tell us.
Precisely. And that's what this deep dive is all about, helping you navigate that complexity. We've pulled together a bunch of sources looking at how we can think more clearly when everything feels chaotic and data-packed.
Yeah, this isn't about, becoming a math whiz overnight. It's more about spotting the common ways our brains trip us up.
Right.
And getting some mental tools to make better sense of it all. We're going to unpack some core rules and some really surprising examples from the material.
Okay, so starting with maybe the first big rule from these sources.
Yeah.
You just have to accept that the world is complex.
Mm-hmm.
Like the eel shows, things are rarely simple straight lines.
Right, that fishing example they use is good. You fish for an hour, catch one eel. Okay, so your brain goes, fish 3 hours, get 3 eels. Simple math.
But it breaks down immediately, doesn't it?
Totally. Try fishing for 3 days. You're not going to get 72 eels just by multiplying out. Reality just doesn't scale like that.
And it really doesn't scale like that with exponential stuff. This is where our intuition just fails spectacularly.
Yeah.
The source uses a really clear COVID-19 example. Let's say a virus gets 50% more lethal.
Okay, more deadly. Intuition says 50% more deaths, roughly.
Yeah, mathematically, that's basically right.
Yeah.
If the fatality rate goes from, say, 0.8% to 1.2% over 30 days with the same starting infections, yeah, about 50% more deaths. It tracks.
Makes sense. More lethal, proportionally more deaths. Got it.
But, and this is the kicker, what if it's not more lethal, but just 50% more transmissible? Spreads easier.
Okay.
So it's our number, how many people one sick person infects.
Okay.
Maybe goes from 1.1 to 1.65. Doesn't sound as dramatic as a 50% jump in deadliness, maybe.
Right, just spreads a bit faster. So what happens then?
Over that same 30 days.
Yeah.
Same starting point, same lethality. That 50% increase in spread doesn't cause 50% more deaths. It causes almost 7 times more deaths.
Whoa, wait. 7 times. Not just a little bump, but massively more. Just because it spreads faster.
That's the power of exponential growth. Compounding. It sneaks up on you. We saw it, right? Early COVID in places like Spain, as the source mentions, started quiet. A few cases here, a few dozen there. It doesn't seem like much in a big country.
Yeah, you wouldn't panic immediately.
But the growth was already exponential. By the time the numbers looked scary to your intuition, the hospitals were already getting slammed. It was too late.
So the lesson is, small changes in how fast something spreads can have way, way bigger effects than similar changes in how dangerous it is because of that compounding. You don't see the explosion coming until it's basically happening.
Exactly. And it's not just exponential growth. You also have chaotic systems. Things that are just fundamentally unpredictable. Edward Lorenz and his weather simulation, that's the classic.
Right, the butterfly effect guy.
Yeah. He reran a simulation, but use slightly rounded numbers from a printout. Tiny difference, like 0.01%, negligible, you'd think.
But it wasn't negligible.
Not at all. That tiny rounding error, it got amplified like crazy over the course of the simulation. Led to totally different results. One run predicts sunshine, the other predicts a hurricane.
Wow. So a microscopic change at the start leads to completely different futures, which means predicting some things, like long-range weather, isn't just hard, it's maybe impossible by its very nature.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
So step 1, accept complexity. And tied to that is rule 2. Figuring out why things happen, causation, is really hard. Things rarely have just one single cause.
Yeah, my gut always wants the simple answer, like Chernobyl. You want to point to one person, one mistake.
But the investigations, as the sources detail, show it was, well, a whole mess, a cascade. Yes, the operators made huge errors, disabling safety systems, running at a low power, pushing ahead with a dangerous test.
Definitely sounds bad.
It was. But there was also a massive design flaw in the control rods themselves. When they inserted them to shut it down, the graphite tips actually caused a power surge.
Yeah.
The exact opposite of what should happen.
Oh, what?
And then there was the bigger picture, this background of a deficient safety culture in the whole Soviet system at the time.
So it wasn't just the operators or just the design, it was like multiple things going wrong at once, interacting with a system-level problem. Finding one culprit just misses the point.
Exactly. And that hunt for the single cause fails us in everyday life too, right?
Yeah.
Like, what makes you happy?
Mm-hmm.
Is it just money? Sure, data shows richer people tend to report more satisfaction, but come on, it's obviously a mix, isn't it? Health, relationships, feeling like your work matters, your basic temperament, even your genes.
Right. It's loads of things interacting. None of them alone is the answer.
And their influence shifts. Genetics might play a role, maybe, like the source mentions, about 10% in academic results or something.
Yeah, the genetic lottery.
But even that 10% isn't fixed. It interacts with your environment, your opportunities. Like the funny example they use. If you were born in outer space, your genes for height wouldn't matter much if there's no gravity. Circumstance changes everything.
Okay, so multiple interacting causes. That leads into this idea of emergent phenomena.
Yeah, emergence. It's where the whole system does stuff that's way more complex than what the individual parts are doing. Simple interactions create complex behavior you couldn't predict just by looking at one piece.
Like those incredible bird flocks. Murmurations, thousands of birds swirling together.
Perfect example.
Yeah.
There's no leader bird shouting orders. Each bird is just following a few simple rules.
Yeah.
Stick near your neighbors, fly the same way, don't crash.
That's it.
Pretty much.
Right.
And from those super simple local rules, boom, you get this complex, coordinated, beautiful dance of the whole flock. It emerges from the bottom up.
Fascinating. So the big pattern isn't planned, it just happens from lots of small actions.
Right, and think about how that applies to us. Markets setting prices, economic bubbles inflating and bursting, fashion trends taking off, traffic jams forming out of nowhere.
Yeah, the price of a book isn't decided by some committee, it just emerges from loads of people buying and selling.
Exactly. And sometimes problems don't really have a single bad guy or cause. They just emerge from lots of individual decisions that seem rational on their own.
The sources have this really striking example of emergence. The relative age effect?
Oh yeah, that one's wild. If you look at pro soccer leagues, say, in Spain,
Yeah.
you find way more players born in January than in December.
Wait, what? How can your birthday month affect if you become a pro athlete? That makes no sense.
It's pure emergence. It comes from how we group kids by age. In school, or youth sports, the kids born in January are the oldest in their year group.
Okay.
So when they're 7 or 8 years old, being a few months older can actually mean you're noticeably bigger, maybe stronger, maybe slightly more coordinated than the kids born later in the same year group.
Okay. A small physical edge just from being older within that group.
Right? A tiny initial advantage. Yeah. But then a cascade starts, a feedback loop. Because they're a bit bigger, maybe they get noticed more by coaches, picked first for the team, get more playing time, more attention. Parents and coaches encourage them more because they look promising.
And that extra attention and practice adds up over the years.
Hugely. It compounds. Even if the initial biological edge disappears as they get older, the advantage from all that extra coaching, confidence, and opportunity, it sticks. And it grows.
That's incredible. So it's not really about being born in January, it's about being oldest in the arbitrary group.
Exactly. And it's not just sports, the sources say. They see this pattern in academics getting into top universities, even who becomes a CEO or politician. That simple cutoff date in the system creates this powerful, self-reinforcing effect that shapes people's whole lives.
Wow, that really shows how complex systems can create outcomes we'd never expect. Okay, so moving from complexity itself to how we handle, well, all the data about it.
Yeah, the sources hammer this home. We are swimming in data now, absolutely drenched.
No kidding, it's everywhere. Managing inventory, predicting fuel costs, figuring out traffic flows, even like knowing when to water your houseplants based on sensors. Every job, every part of life.
Which means choosing the right ways to measure things, the right metrics, is super important. Use a bad metric, get a bad answer.
Right.
The example about measuring online news sites is spot on. You compare site A and site B based on monthly unique users. Site A has 20 million, site B has 10 million, so site A is twice as big, right?
Seems like it, but maybe not.
Maybe not at all. What if those 20 million users on site A just clicked once from Facebook and left? That's 20 million page views. But what if site B's 10 million users are loyal readers who visit, say, 10 times each?
Then site B has 100 million page views. Way more engagement.
Exactly. So unique users was a terrible metric if you cared about influence or reader loyalty. You needed page views or time spent or something else.
So the takeaway is often you need relative metrics, not just absolute counts.
Generally, yeah. Comparing Spain's 50 billion education budget to Finland's 12 billion, misleading. Their populations' economies are totally different.
You need spending per student or per capita?
Right. Or as a percentage of government spending. Spain's €1,000 per capita versus Finland's 2,300. Or 10% of public spending versus 12%. That tells a much clearer story. Like for a striker in football, goals per 90 minutes played is way better than just total goals scored.
You can't always ignore the absolute numbers, can you?
Good point. No. Like Cyprus might have more soldiers per person than China, which is interesting relatively.
Yeah.
But the absolute fact that China has the biggest army on the planet, that's probably the more important military reality, usually.
Need both views.
And you often have to adjust data to make fair comparisons, like adjusting movie box office for inflation. Gone with the Wind looks smaller than Titanic in raw dollars, but adjust for inflation.
PWTW sold way more tickets, right?
Yeah, like 50% more in the US. Probably the biggest movie ever domestically when you adjust. Or using seasonal adjustments for unemployment figures, or this thing called purchasing power parity to compare incomes across countries with different costs of living.
And those simple summaries we see everywhere, like the average, the mean, can be totally misleading.
Oh, totally. The Bill Gates walks into a bar joke, right?
Yeah. Suddenly, the average person in the bar is a billionaire, which tells you nothing useful about anyone else there.
Exactly. The middle value, if you line everyone up, is often much, much better, especially when you have extreme outliers. Like if one sibling is a millionaire and the others aren't, the median income gives you a much better sense of the typical sibling.
Right. The median isn't yanked around by extremes like the mean is. Although the mean is easier if you only have totals, I guess. Median needs all the individual numbers. True. But even a single number, mean or median, often isn't enough. It hides the shape of the data. You really want to see the distribution. Like a histogram showing population by age group tells you so much more about a country than just its average age.
Yeah, you see the bulges, the gaps.
And one really practical tip from the sources?
Yeah.
Get comfortable doing quick back-of-the-napkin calculations. Just grab your phone calculator. Does this number someone threw at you even seem remotely possible?
The coffee pot example was good for that.
Yeah. Estimate the Spanish market. Okay, population, maybe average coffee drinker habits. You'd guess maybe, what, 800 million pods a year? A billion? Something like that.
Okay, reasonable guess.
The actual number turned out to be 2.39 billion, so your estimate was off, sure. But it gave you the right order of magnitude. It wasn't millions, it wasn't hundreds of billions, it was billions.
And that helps you sniff out bogus claims. Like if someone then said the Spanish coffee pot industry makes 12 billion a year.
Exactly. Your quick math says, hang on, 2 billion pods at, say, 35 cents each, that's like 700 million maybe, 12 billion euros. That's over 1% of Spain's entire GDP. For coffee pods, your gut should scream, something's fishy.
This is so important for spotting bad arguments, like those early comparisons between COVID and the flu that used dodgy stats.
Oh, the classic apples and oranges mistake. Comparing COVID's IFR, that's infection fatality rate, deaths among everyone infected, even mild cases with the flu's CFR, case fatality rate, deaths among diagnosed cases only.
Which are very different things.
Totally different denominators. That 2% flu number people threw around, that was CFR, usually for hospitalized or severe cases. The actual IFR for seasonal flu is way, way lower, like 0.1% or even 0.05%.
So when early COVID estimates showed an IFR of maybe 0.5% or 1%.
It meant COVID was potentially 10, 20, even 50 times more lethal than typical flu, based on those early numbers.
Wow.
And the source points out, you didn't even need the acronyms, just common sense. If the flu really killed 1 in 50 people who caught it every year, we'd all know someone who died from it. We'd treat flu season very differently. That number just feels wrong.
So combine that quick math check with trusting your gut when a number seems totally out of whack. Scrutinize the numbers, understand the metrics. Okay, rule 3, protect your samples from bias. It's a big one.
Huge.
Yeah.
Our brains are just not good at sampling randomly or representatively. And this leads to all sorts of skewed views.
Survivorship bias is the classic, the WWII planes.
Right. The military saw planes coming back from missions, shot full of holes in certain areas, wings, fuselage, so they thought, okay, we need to add armor there.
Makes sense, right. Reinforce where it gets hit.
Except,
Oh.
it's exactly back. The planes they were looking at were the survivors. The fact they came back with holes in those areas meant those areas weren't critical. The areas with no bullet holes on the returning planes, those were the critical spots. If a plane got hit there, maybe the engine, the cockpit, it didn't come back at all. You needed to armor the places that looked untouched on the survivors.
Because your sample of the returning planes was biased. You weren't seeing the ones that didn't survive. That applies to so much, like looking at successful entrepreneurs who dropped out of college.
Totally. Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Zuckerberg, you see them and think, maybe college isn't necessary. But you're only seeing the tiny handful who succeeded spectacularly despite dropping out. You're not seeing the thousands, maybe millions, who dropped out and whose companies failed or who struggled. Massive survivorship bias.
That's a type of selection bias, right? Your sample isn't representative, like polling people in a fancy mall about their spending habits.
Or asking university students how much they read to gauge the whole population's reading habits. Students read more, your sample is skewed from the start.
And then there's that more subtle one, collider bias, the Harvard example.
Yeah, that's a tricky one. Think about a super selective place like Harvard. They admit people who are either incredibly smart academically or amazing athletes, or sometimes both. But you can get in being exceptional at just one.
Okay, so they select for high achievers in at least one area.
Right. Now, if you only look at the students already inside Harvard, you might find something weird. You might see a negative correlation between academic scores and athletic prowess within that group.
Wait, negative, so the better athletes are slightly worse students at Harvard, and vice versa.
Could be. Even if, in the general population, there's no link at all between being smart and being sporty. The act of selecting for excellence in either field creates this artificial trade-off within the selected group. Harvard itself is the collider, creating that misleading link.
Wow, okay, so just how you pick your group can create patterns that aren't real outside that group.
Exactly. And getting a truly representative sample of a whole population, it's incredibly hard. Look at the problems with the 2016 US election polls.
Yeah, many of them missed the mark.
A key reason was they undersampled a specific group, white voters without college degrees. That group swung heavily towards Trump in a way they hadn't before, and the polls didn't have enough of them in their samples to catch that shift accurately. The sample didn't reflect the actual electorate that showed up.
And even old methods, like random phone calls, had problems. Who even answers unknown numbers anymore?
Right, sampling bias. And then non-response bias are the people who refuse to take the poll different from those who agree. Probably.
So it seems impossible. How do they even try?
Well, it is hard, but there are techniques, like using statistical weights. If you know your sample has too few people from a certain demographic compared to the census, you can give the responses from that group a bit more weight in the final calculation to try and correct for it.
Okay. Like adjusting the balance.
Yeah. The funny example they gave, predicting an election by polling Xbox players. You could theoretically do it if you had incredibly accurate data on how Xbox players differ from the general electorate and could apply the perfect weights to adjust their answers. Highly impractical, but illustrates the principle.
Okay, so complex world, tricky data, biased samples. Let's talk prediction and chance. Rule 5, don't underestimate randomness.
Oh, we are terrible at this. Our brains desperately want to find causes and patterns, even when it's just random noise. Regression to the mean is a huge one.
Right, extreme things tend to be followed by less extreme things.
Exactly. Like the source suggests with homeopathy. People often try it when their symptoms are absolutely terrible, right? At their peak.
Makes sense, you're desperate.
But when symptoms are at their peak, where are they likely to go next?
Probably get a bit better, just naturally.
Right. They regress towards the average level of sickness. So you take the homeopathy, your symptoms naturally get a bit better, and you think, wow, this stuff works. But it might have just been natural regression.
Like a student getting a crazy high score on a test. Some skill, sure, but maybe some luck too.
Probably. So on the next test, even if it's similar, their score is likely to be a bit lower, closer to their true average ability. The lucky part doesn't repeat.
And those footballers scoring insane numbers of goals in one season, like Ibrahimovic or Higuain hitting over a goal per game.
Yeah, that's an extreme performance. Amazing players, obviously. But are they likely to repeat that exact insane number the very next season? Probably not. Their performance will likely regress a bit, back towards their still excellent but less extreme career average.
So what's the practical advice then, when making predictions?
Your prediction should be less extreme than the data point you're reacting to. If a player has one unbelievable season, great, sign them. But don't budget for them repeating that absolute peak performance. Temper your expectations back towards their average. We mistake short-term streaks, which are full of random noise, for stable skill all the time.
It's that noise versus signal problem again. Hard to tell what's real change and what's just random fluctuation, like stepping on the scale every day.
Exactly. Your weight bounces around by a pound or two day to day. That's mostly noise, water retention, whatever. The signal is the underlying trend over weeks or months.
So how do you find the signal in the noise?
Filtering. Averaging. If you average your daily weight over, say, a week, that smooths out the random daily bumps and shows you the real trend, the signal.
Same for polls.
Definitely. Averaging multiple election polls dramatically cuts down the random noise from individual surveys. The source says the average error gets cut roughly in half just by averaging.
But there's a trade-off, isn't there, with averaging?
Yeah, there's a delay. If you average your weight over the last 7 days, the number you see today reflects your average weight over the past week, not your exact weight right now.
So you lose some real-time info to get rid of the noise.
It's the constant dilemma. Smooth out the noise to see the pattern clearly, or react instantly to every little wiggle, even if it's meaningless.
And our brains love seeing patterns even when it is just noise, the clustering illusion.
Oh yeah. Gamers feeling like FIFA is scripted against them when a few unlucky things happen close together late in a match.
Or the hot hand in basketball. A player sinks 3 shots in a row and everyone thinks, he's on fire! Pass him the ball!
Feels totally real, right? But that famous study back in '85 looked at the stats, sequences of makes and misses, and found they were basically random. Streaks happen in random data just by chance, but our brains latch onto them and see a pattern, a hot hand, that isn't actually statistically there, it's a mirage.
We're bad at randomness. We even struggle to fake it. If you ask people to write down a random sequence of coin flips.
They alternate too much. Heads, tails, heads, tails. They don't put in the long streaks like 5 heads in a row that happen surprisingly often in real random flips.
So, main takeaway. Be super skeptical of streaks and apparent patterns. Chance is a powerful force and often mimics skill or meaning.
But here's a twist. Even if you don't know the cause of something, if 2 things are reliably correlated, you can still use that for prediction.
Okay, how so?
The example of having books in the home. Does reading those specific books cause kids to go to university? Probably not directly. But the presence of books is a strong correlate, a sign or proxy for other things that do matter.
Like parents who value education, maybe more resources, a certain kind of environment.
Exactly. So even though the books themselves aren't the direct cause, the correlation is real and predictive. If a home has lots of books, the kids are statistically more likely to go to uni.
Like banks hiring physics PhDs to be analysts.
Right. Does studying astrophysics directly teach you financial modeling? No. But getting a PhD in physics is a strong proxy for other traits, the bank values: intelligence, perseverance, problem-solving skills, independence. So even if it's not causal for the job skills, it's a good predictor of being a successful analyst.
So you shouldn't ignore strong correlations just because they aren't direct causes, if you just need to predict something.
It would be silly to ignore them if they work. This is where the sources distinguish between causal inference, trying to figure out what would happen if I changed only this one thing, which is hard and often needs experiments, and just regular prediction, which is about finding reliable associations between inputs and outputs.
Got it. And within prediction, there's another key distinction: exploration versus confirmation.
Super important. Exploration is when you're just digging around in data, playing with it, looking for interesting patterns, maybe anomalies. It's messy, creative, like strolling with no destination, as the source puts it.
But vulnerable to finding flukes, right? Seeing patterns that are just chance.
Highly vulnerable. Exploration gives you hypotheses, ideas, things that might be true. Confirmation is the rigorous part. You take a specific hypothesis you found during exploration and you test it deliberately, ideally using new independent data.
So explore first, find something interesting, then design a real test to see if it holds up.
Exactly. Like maybe in exploring survey data, you notice a weird pattern. People born in spring seem slightly more likely to say their favorite color is green. Huh. That's your hypothesis from exploration.
Okay, could be random noise.
Probably is. So for confirmation, you design a new study. You run a quick poll on Twitter, as the example suggests, specifically asking people their birth season and favorite color to see if that flimsy pattern actually replicates in fresh data.
And crucially, even confirmation doesn't give you absolute proof.
Never. No finding is 100% certain. Confirmation just increases the probability that your hypothesis is true. It strengthens your belief, moves it along the continuum towards certainty, but you never fully arrive.
Which leads perfectly into one of the biggest intuitive traps: ignoring the base rate, a priori probability.
Ah, yes, the vampire test. Classic. Okay, there's a new test for vampirism. It's advertised as 95% accurate, meaning 95% of actual vampires test positive, and 95% of actual humans test negative. Pretty good test, right?
Sounds great. 95% accuracy. So your brother-in-law, maybe you suspect him, takes the test, comes back positive. Is he a vampire?
Your gut reaction, based on 95% accurate, is probably, OMG, yes, he's a vampire.
Right. The test is really accurate.
But you've forgotten the most important question.
Which is?
The base rate. How common are vampires in the general population anyway? Let's say they're incredibly rare. Like 1 in 1,000 people.
Okay, very rare.
Now think about it. Even with a test that's 95% accurate, if you test 1,000 people, including that one vampire, the test will correctly identify the vampire, one true positive. But among the 999 humans, 5% will get a false positive result. That's about 50 people.
Ah, so you end up with 1 true positive and 50 false positives.
Exactly. So if your brother-in-law tests positive, is he likely the one real vampire or one of the 50 humans who got a false positive?
He's overwhelmingly likely to be human.
Despite the 95% accurate test, the base rate, how rare vampires are to begin with, completely flips the interpretation. But our intuition grabs onto the test accuracy and ignores the base rate. That's the base rate fallacy. Huge insight. Always ask about the base rate.
Wow. Okay. And finally, on uncertainty. We're just bad at communicating probability clearly.
Terribly. Nate Silver's models giving Clinton a 71% chance in 2016. A lot of people heard that as, it's in the bag, guaranteed.
But a 29% chance of Trump winning, that's not negligible at all. That's like, what, missing a penalty kick? Happens all the time. Or Russian roulette with almost 2 bullets loaded. You wouldn't take those odds lightly.
Exactly. We seem to understand probabilities better when they're tied to concrete, intuitive stakes. We need to get better at communicating what these percentages actually mean in terms of risk and likelihood.
And remember the big takeaway. You don't need perfect certainty to make a decision.
Right, the Obama example. Gather the best evidence you can, acknowledge the uncertainty, be cautious, but then act. You have to make calls with incomplete information. Pretending you need certainty before acting is often just an excuse for paralysis.
Okay, so that covers complexity, data, bias, chance. Let's shift to decision-making itself and our own limits there. First big trap, one-sided bets.
Yeah, we often grab onto the appealing side of a decision and ignore the unavoidable downsides or trade-offs, like being passionately against CO2 emissions. Sounds noble, but does that mean you're also willing to accept significantly less air travel or higher energy costs or major lifestyle changes? Often people haven't thought that through.
Or demanding absolute gun rights without acknowledging the statistical increase in the risk of being shot that comes with more guns in circulation. You have to weigh both sides.
The torture dilemma they mention is brutal. Torture a suspect to maybe find a bomb and save 100 people on a plane. The immediate emotional pull is, yes, save them.
Obvious choice, seems like.
But you have to look down the decision tree. What happens if you make torture acceptable, even in extreme cases? Does it get used more often? Does it lead to false information? Does it damage your country's standing? Could legitimizing it actually cause more harm in the long run than it prevents in this one instance? It's not a simple one-sided calculation. You need the whole picture.
This connects to Pareto's ideas, right? About optimal outcomes.
Yeah, a Pareto optimum is a situation where you literally can't make anyone better off without making someone else worse off. You've squeezed all the win-win potential out. A Pareto front is the line showing all those possible optimal trade-offs.
But lots of situations aren't optimal yet.
Exactly. Many situations are suboptimal. There are potential Pareto improvements, ways to make at least one person better off without hurting anyone else.
Yeah.
Like the example of translating the book. If it generates more profit overall, both the author and the publisher can potentially get a bigger slice than before. Win-win.
And this applies personally too, like choosing a job.
Sure. Maybe you're choosing between more money and more vacation time. There's a Pareto front there, representing the best possible combinations of those two things for you. You're trying to find the point on that front that best matches your priorities.
Then there's the 80-20 rule, also Pareto, right?
Sort of, yeah. The Pareto principle. Roughly 80% of the results often come from 20% of the effort.
The trick is applying that wisely.
Totally. Don't spend hours agonizing over which brand of toilet paper to buy. Low impact. But maybe put 90% of your initial effort into mastering the fundamentals of a crucial skill, like writing well, because that gives you the biggest return.
Perfectionism can be a trap here.
Big time. Is it better to spend weeks crafting one absolutely perfect job application, or send out 20 pretty good ones? Given the randomness in hiring, often the 20 adequate ones give you a better shot. Same dating. Seeking one perfect soulmate versus meeting lots of reasonably compatible people. Rolling the dice more often can be better than trying to make one roll perfect.
But sometimes you do need that perfection, right? That last 5%.
Absolutely. If you're Simone Biles going for Olympic gold, that tiny difference, that last 5%, might take 80% of the total training effort. For truly elite performance in high-stakes situations, you need that dedication to the final details. The key is knowing when 80-20 is good enough, and when you need to push for that difficult final bit of excellence, choosing where to invest your energy.
And sometimes math can help find the truly optimal way, like Kantorovich and linear programming for that plywood factory.
Yeah, using optimization techniques to figure out the absolute best production plan, given all the constraints. Intuition often can't handle that level of complexity.
Speaking of intuition, it also loves shortcuts, like stereotypes, the Tom example.
Right. Tom is described as liking sci-fi, maybe a bit nerdy. Is he more likely to be a computer science student or a social science student?
Intuition immediately goes, sci-fi, computer science.
Because that fits the stereotype.
Yeah.
But what does intuition ignore?
The base rate. There are probably way more social science students overall than computer science students.
Exactly. Liking sci-fi nudges the probability towards CS a bit, sure, but it doesn't overcome the fact that social science student is just a much more common category to begin with. You have to combine the specific info, like sci-fi, with the base rate, how many students in each field. Intuition jumps straight to the stereotype and forgets the base rate.
And sometimes our emotions just make us act, well, irrationally, like those minor league baseball players.
The Pando pooling example. It makes perfect economic sense for them. They all pool a small percentage of their future earnings. If you make it big in the majors, you pay a small slice into the pool, but you're still rich. If you don't make it, you get a payout from the pool, funded by the guys who did potentially life-changing money when you need it most.
It's like insurance against not making your dream. Seems logical.
Totally logical. You only lose compared to not joining if you hit the absolute jackpot.
Yeah.
Yet, many players refuse to join because emotionally, they didn't want to bet against themselves. They didn't want to even plan for the possibility of failure, even if it was the rational financial move. It shows how our feelings about our goals and dreams can just override cold, hard calculation.
Fascinating. And finally, this illusion of explanatory depth. We think we get stuff way better than we actually do.
But definitely. Like a refrigerator, we all use one, feel like we understand it. But if I asked you to explain step by step how it actually makes things cold, the compressor, the coolant, the coils.
Yeah, I'd get stuck pretty quick. Vague ideas, but not the details. Like trying to draw a bicycle from memory, you realize you don't know where all the bars connect.
Exactly. You only know the surface level. And the best way to shatter that illusion, try to explain it, or even better, try to teach it, that forces you to confront what you don't know. Like Feynman said, if you want to master something, teach it.
And this isn't just about bikes or fridges. It applies to our opinions on big, complex issues too, right?
Hugely. Politics, economics, international conflicts. We grab onto a few talking points, maybe from news or social media, form a strong opinion really fast.
And they feel super confident about it.
Yeah, even though our actual understanding of the underlying history or economics or causal chains might be incredibly shallow, as Montaigne apparently said, nothing is so firmly believed as what we least know. Ignorance breeds confidence sometimes. The takeaway: challenge yourself. Try explaining your strong opinions. Be humble about how much you really know.
So wrapping all this up, what's the path forward in this complex, data-drenched world?
Well, the sources suggest not being afraid of it. Yes, data and AI can seem scary, dystopian even, but they also hold enormous potential for good governments, using data to actually improve services, understand problems better.
And we need to break down those old walls between, like, science and humanity.
Well, we need people who are bilingual. Sociologists studying algorithms need to understand some code. Engineers building social platforms need to think like psychologists about human interaction.
And the final piece of advice seems to be about attitude.
Yeah, cultivate curiosity.
Yeah.
Keep that sense of wonder about how complex things are, from galaxies down to, a baby discovering its own hands. Recognize your intuition has flaws. Really listen to people who see things differently. Be wary of feeling too certain, too rigid.
Stay curious, basically. Don't assume you have all the answers.
It's not just a nice sentiment, it's practical. That attitude helps you learn, adapt, make better decisions, and maybe, as the sources hope, contribute to making things a little better.
It really is a continuous journey, isn't it? Questioning, learning, refining how we think.
Absolutely.
Okay, so that brings us towards the end of this deep dive. We started with that amazing eel, right? A symbol of baffling complexity. We looked at how our brains struggle with exponential growth, with chaos, why things rarely have one simple cause.
Yeah, and those hidden emergent forces, like the relative age effect, just quietly shaping outcomes. Then we got into data needing the right metrics, being wary of averages, the power of a quick estimate, spotting when stats are being misused.
Understanding how bias creeps into our samples through survival or selection, how our intuition gets fooled by randomness, by regression to the mean, seeing patterns that aren't there. The value of correlation for prediction, separating exploration from confirmation.
And that huge one, always remembering the base rate.
Yeah.
Then on to decisions, seeing both sides of a bet, looking for those win-win Pareto improvements, using 80-20 wisely, but knowing when perfection matters.
Recognizing how stereotypes and emotions mess with our choices, and finally, that humbling illusion of explanatory depth, thinking we know more than we do.
It's quite a toolkit.
It really is. And these aren't just, abstract ideas for academics, they're practical mental tools.
Yeah.
Tools to help you avoid getting fooled, make smarter choices day to day, at work, in life, just to navigate a world that, frankly, doesn't always play by our intuitive rules.
Well said.
So as we wrap up, maybe one final thought from the sources to leave you with, something to chew on. Think about a topic you feel strongly about, something you have a definite opinion on right now. What if you had to sit down and explain in detail exactly how it works, or the full chain of causes and effects? How much of your confidence comes from a deep understanding versus that illusion of explanatory depth?
Thanks for watching this episode of Margin Notes. If it made you think differently, even just a little, consider hitting like, subscribing, and sharing it with someone who might need a new lens on the world. We've got more deep dives coming soon into complexity, clarity, and the hidden patterns behind everyday life. Until then, stay curious, ask better questions, and don't trust your gut too much. See you in the next one.